It's week 9. Week 9 is here. It is an interesting slate of games. We were all discussing this, that, there are some very good teams facing off against each other, and there's some games that we somewhat just want to skip on Sundays. But don't worry, we'll be covering every single one on the front of the site. Pat is dishing out who's blurbing which one. So I think the totem pole of who he cares about versus not will be defined very much on this Sunday. All right. Since it's you, Pat, and since you are the resident expert of the Drew Lock fan club, we'll start with the Denver Broncos going to the Atlanta Falcons. 4-point favorites are the Falcons, are at home at 50 total. Both teams have a losing record. Starting a bit slow here, but Pat, Drew Lock is coming off a 21-point fourth quarter last week comeback victory against the Los Angeles Chargers. Can they continue that momentum as underdogs against this bad, atrocious Falcons defense?
I mean, excuse me, probably not. You kind of just put what happens, what happens against the Chargers, stays against the Chargers. Drew Lock was, 2 weeks ago was just horrifyingly bad. It was bad weather against an elite Chiefs team, but even as someone who wants to see Drew Lock succeed, I'm yeah, they're going to have to end this experiment pretty soon. So the huge rally of the comeback, the walk-off touchdown last week, I did not really see coming. But if you're going to try to build some momentum, the Atlanta Falcons are a good place to start. Kind of like last year, the Falcons got off to a horrible defensive start. Then they had a few games in the middle of the season where they're almost like the 85 Bears. The Falcons have tightened up on defense since firing Dan Quinn. So maybe we have to kind of reassess if the Falcons are an every week smash spot. But yeah, even as someone who wants to see Drew Lock succeed, even in the context of a supposedly good matchup, Drew Lock is still bottom 5 quarterback, barely QB2 viable. And, basically if you're messing around in DFS, that's where Drew Lock comes into play this week.
Drew Lock has the second highest rate of passes thrown 20 plus yards downfield. But on those passes,
that's his MO.
He is 5 of 27 for 166 yards and 3 picks. It is disastrous. Having said that, like you were saying, Pat, in Superflex leagues and 2 quarterback leagues against this atrocious Falcons defense that is rivaling the Seahawks in fantasy points per game allowed to the position, it really isn't the worst start and the worst spot for the Broncos offense. Their rate of 12 personnel scaled back a bit, but that's because Noah Fant has gotten healthier the past 2 games since returning from injury and thus ran more routes and also saw his snaps increase in that time. So between Fant, Jerry Jeudy, who is now finally the past 2 weeks taken over for Tim Patrick, and Drew Lock, there is actually something to be excited about in this game, I think.
I think one of the storylines this week is there's a couple teams that just don't have a clear-cut fantasy starter. I think that Noah Fant is certainly a tight end 1. Maybe you can flirt with Melvin Gordon as a low-end RB2, but there's a lot of teams that are projected for 22, 23 points, and they don't have an established number 1 receiver or an established number 1 running back. And I think that Broncos fall into that category. We don't know if Tim Patrick's going to play. Last week, Jerry Jeudy actually led the NFL in air yards, but like you said, when those air yards are coming downfield from Drew Lock, you have to discount those. Not all air yards are the same. So I think that unfortunately Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick are at best wide receiver 4s, maybe with a little bit of upside for the Falcons. But I think that you can expect a better game for the team in general, but they're still lacking a lot of fantasy stars this week.
I was going to make the same exact point, Hayden, so I will not repeat it, but just quickly say that when Deshaun Hamilton is the leading wide receiver and Drew Lock, throws 3 touchdown passes, it's frustrating when it's one of his better games that we've ever seen him play. And yet we don't know who to extrapolate from there other than Noah Fant, who is getting more involved. I think he saw 8 or 9 targets last weekend as someone, because that position is so up in the air. Let's look on the Falcons side of this. They're coming off a nice victory of the Carolina Panthers. Todd Gurley has been good from what he is now in terms of a straight line power back. But last week we saw just on 11 carries, Brian Hill out-yard him, Pat. And then we also saw Calvin Ridley leave that contest. The status of Calvin Ridley right now, and what that allowed is, and we've seen, the Falcons be up and down this year, but Pat, it certainly seems like if Matt Ryan has Julio Jones to throw the football to, this Falcons team is obviously much better off and more consistent with him.
Well, and he's really gotten Julio Jones cooking since he came back from his hamstring injury. Matt Ryan, it's weird. He's only surpassed one passing touchdown once, I believe, in his past 6 starts. And it doesn't feel like he's like collapsed to that degree. And he didn't have a passing score last week. He had, I believe it was only the 10th rushing touchdown of his entire career. So he saved a little face with that. But Matt Ryan is really kind of on the spot here. And the Broncos they're not an awful matchup, but they're not a great matchup. They're still middle of the road against the pass. Calvin Ridley has not been ruled out, but he's probably on the wrong side of questionable. And Matt Ryan is someone we really need to like reestablish his floor. And I don't know if we have to forget about ceiling for now. I mean, it seems silly with Matt Ryan because he's someone who always has a 4 touchdown game in his back pocket, but someone who has really, really been struggling to find the end zone. And in the backfield, I mean, Brian Hill outgained Todd Gurley, I believe, on 7 fewer carries. Todd Gurley had 18, Brian Hill at 11. For the second straight week, Todd Gurley very uncharacteristically made a huge mental mistake that they were trying to run out the clock, and he ran out of bounds, I believe, on a 3rd down. And just the kind of error you don't really see from any NFL running back, but especially Todd Gurley. And just who knows, maybe like his struggles are starting to go to his head. But Brian Hill, I actually have him ranked in the top 40 this week. So I think 2 of the past 3 weeks he's reached 10 touches. And Todd Gurley's had like a hammerlock on this job all year, but maybe something to watch going forward.
My roommate's matchups column last week actually mentioned to beware of Todd Gurley because on a short week, he was concerned that his workload would get scaled back. And I wasn't thinking of that. And that's actually what happened. So that's what I'm attributing that one game to. And I'm still treating Todd Gurley as a low-end RB2 this week. My concern for the Falcons offense really is, do they plummet like they did earlier this year without Julio if they don't have Calvin? I don't think so personally. Remember last year, 3 games without Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones still stood the test of time with 20, 15, and 13 targets in those 3 games. So he's safe as a top 3 wide receiver no matter what. But if they do plummet and Matt Ryan becomes unstartable again against this overrated Broncos defense, then we still have to assess the situation moving forward as well.
Yeah, the Falcons are projected for 27 points this week. That's the 8th most on the week. So I'm still inclined to have Matt Ryan inside my top 12 rankings this week. I think Hayden Hurst also deserves to be a low-end tight end one play. He's 2nd in the NFL in tight end routes. Maybe Calvin Ridley being out makes him a more appealing guy. Maybe he gets 6, 7, 8 targets again. So I think the total ceiling is out of the picture right now for Atlanta because we are seeing Matt Ryan probably the first year of his career where you're noticeably seeing a decline. And remember last year before his injury, he was balling out. I think this year we can finally see the momentum going away from him. So I think that the total ceiling is out of the picture, but I still think that there's still somewhat of a floor as long as Julio Jones is healthy.
And what's funny is we say these negative things, and yet Matt Ryan currently leads the league in passing yards.
Wow.
But again, he's had more than one touchdown once in 6 starts. That is crazy.
All right, let's move on. Keep that game in a rearview mirror and move on to much better ones. This is the 6-1 Seattle Seahawks, a lot of S's in there, as 3-point favorites going over to the Buffalo Bills, who are 6-2, a massive total in this game of 55. We talked about it, Pat, and Denny and I did in the episode prior to this one about the Seattle Seahawks and the composition that they have offensively. I mean, in terms of fantasy points per game, the quarterback 1, the wide receiver 2, the wide receiver 3, and now they're going up against a Bills defense that has absolutely stunk it up. And, Sean McDermott has not been able to turn them around despite being a great defensive mind for years and years and years. So that's a smash spot. Meanwhile, possibly a smash spot on the other side as well, Hayden. I mean, we haven't seen the great Josh Allen from the first 4 weeks of the season in the last few weeks. Is this the time when we get a top 5 performance from Josh Allen, a top 12 performance from Stephon Diggs, or could that Seattle defense be inching closer to actually league average?
I think that the Seahawks are still going to be really bad. Their injury report is still awful. They're probably going to get Jamal Adams back, which certainly helps. That's their playmaker. They're going to blitz him a lot. They're probably going to put him inside the box a lot. But I think that the Seahawks are going to continue to allow probably the most pass attempts per game, which they currently are, the most wide receiver fantasy points allowed per game. And I think that Josh Allen should be this is a spot for him to get back in as an upside quarterback one play. I don't think that the floor is ever going to be there completely with Josh Allen unless he's running the ball. But the thing I'm keeping an eye on is John Brown. He has kind of just fallen off the map. His injury with his knee is clearly holding him back. He didn't practice on Wednesday. I'm sure he's going to play, but he's not at 100%. So I think that even puts more on Stephon Diggs' plate. He's third in targets per game at 11. So I think that he's easily a wide receiver 1 this week. And then Cole Beasley and John Brown probably going to continue trading off like wide receiver 3 weeks, depending on who's healthy and who's not.
The good news for John Brown, and I'll defend a player as much as I can who has 63 receiving yards since week 3. But the good news for John Brown is that he ran as many routes as Stephon Diggs last week. And we know what the Bills want to do. They've targeted their wide receivers at the second highest rate in the league. And that's exactly where you exploit the Seahawks, on the boundary. So if there were ever a bounce back week, and you're playing Stephon Diggs no matter what, but for John Brown as a wide receiver 3, this would definitely be it.
I'll just say on the Sunday show, you guys told me to start John Brown over Kendrick Bourne, and I did not listen. So I'm the
Darnell Mooney, not Kendrick Bourne. Darnell Mooney.
Was it either way?
Moody beat him too, so don't worry.
Either way, yeah, good point, Hayden. Hey, those Zoomers in their memory, man. But Josh Allen is really on the spot in this game. He has only 6 passing touchdowns over his past 5 starts, and the rushing production has kind of trailed off since the first few weeks. And we would like to think that at least like the one area of obvious progress for Josh Allen this year will be that he routinely takes advantage of great matchups. Not something you could take for granted with Josh Allen in the past. And so he needs to smash this matchup. And because it's not been great the past 4 or 5 games now. And if he can't have a big day, the Seahawks defense has been tightening a little bit, but like Hayden said, this is still a unit to attack and will be all season. We really need to see it from Josh, because if Josh Allen doesn't have a top 8 or 9 day, I mean, how do we assess him as a QB1 going forward? If he can't finish in the upper echelon QB1 ranks this week.
Let's talk about the Seahawks running back situation, Daigle, because it's an important one. And, this is the point in the fantasy football calendar where these fill-in running backs can make or break certain people's weeks. We knew prior to last week that Chris Carson, at least we were told, we didn't know anything. Chris Carson was a game time decision. Carlos Hyde, it was a minor injury. Well, since then, Carlos Hyde's has been technically a much more serious injury than what Chris Carson's is. And now we sit here and on Thursday and believing that DJ Dallas is going to be the starting running back this weekend. Daigle, how are you handling his workload?
The waiver wire this week was about to make or break me, because every option is literally just waiting for the option ahead of them to get ruled out, and we don't know what's going to happen. But for DJ Dallas, if you were patient enough, you were rewarded with the RB3 overall, who handled 18 of the team's 19 running back carries, had 5 catches, and then also 5 touches inside the 10-yard line, which allowed him to leverage that receiving upside into a receiving score from Russell Wilson as well. But it comes down, just like last week, to Friday's practice and then potential setbacks on Saturday. If we see Carson even limited at all on Friday, I would imagine, since he has historically been a warrior with health, he will play, and thus that makes Dallas a RB3 thin flex option perhaps, because we know they'll give the ball to Carson. But if Carson's out, I don't think we're worrying about Travis Homer's health overnight. I think Dallas then stays a top 10 option at his position, just because he will continue to get all the work over Travis Homer.
We'll be waiting. So yeah, Chris Carson, it all comes down to Friday. The Seahawks have said Carlos Hyde sounds out. Mm-hmm. Travis Homer, was active last week, correct? But it appears to have just been an emergency thing. I will pay attention to that because Travis Homer was playing ahead of DJ Dallas all year, mm-hmm. and we don't know for sure if that game has vaulted DJ Dallas ahead of Travis Homer. But I agree with you. I will, if it's down to Dallas and Homer, I will be ranking Dallas higher.
The good news, we'll have answers. This is a 10 my time, 10 a.m. game, the morning game. And
no one speaks West Coast.
I know. It's like the metric system.
But we will get answers early, unlike last week. So you'll be able to tell if he's going to be a borderline top 12 running back, or he's a low end RB3.
And on the other side of the ball for their backfield, Zach Moss finished as the RB2 overall in the week because he pounded in a couple touchdowns. But the point you should take away is that he outsnapped Devin Singletary 31-28. And they are clearly treating him these past 2 weeks as their starter moving forward.
Just from a narrative standpoint, I think this is going to be a polarizing Josh Allen game. Either we get back to his wonderful form that we saw in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, and he hits Stephon Diggs on those deep shots because Seattle's been awful against deep passes this season, or he is measured up against Russell Wilson on the other side of the football, who's obviously the leading MVP candidate, who this team is averaging 4 touchdowns at home and on the road. this season. And if he just looks like, a second tier quarterback going against that, then, and against Seattle's defense, then there's going to be some real cause for concern.
There is.
No, you go first, John, then I'll go in with my nuggets.
I was going to say, to your point, there is no more excuses in this game. You have to respond in this game. The past month, at least we have excuses. That weird Tuesday night game against the Titans, a short turnaround on Monday night, and a bad spot against the Chiefs. The Jets, which remember, they reached the red zone 8 times. They just couldn't punch it in and kicked 8 field goals. And then the Patriots game, who historically have always played them well. There is no excuses to not perform well against the Seahawks.
Yeah, you just laid it out perfectly. He's QB 19 by average points over the past 5 weeks. And like you just said, not all those matchups, they weren't great. I mean, the Jets and even the Titans on the weird week, you needed more. And yeah, he's on the spot.
Let's go now to the 5-2 Baltimore Ravens, who are 2-point favorites on the road against the Indianapolis Colts, who are also 5-2, a small total of 47-ish, smallish in this game. Hayden, are you old enough to know that the Colts used to play in Baltimore? Just quickly.
I do remember. They had that weird little logo.
I did not know it was any different than this logo, so maybe you know more. You're a historian of the
Josh
Baltimore
hasn't
Colts
played
than I
enough
am.
Madden, alternate uniforms, that kind of thing.
No, I have not. Okay, we saw the Ravens last week, Hayden, out-total the Pittsburgh Steelers 457 yards to 221 yards and lose. And a lot of that was because Lamar Jackson's play in certain moments crushed them with definitely turnovers. What are you expecting for Lamar Jackson this week, coming off the heels of a difficult defense in the Steelers, despite putting up a bunch of yards against now another difficult defense, maybe not quite on the caliber of Pittsburgh, but the Colts certainly do have one that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I still think the Colts defense a little bit of like a blue mirage. I don't think they're totally like a top 3, top 4, top 5 unit. They have some talent certainly, and the way that they play defense is they don't want to get beat deep. They want to keep everything in front of them. So I think it all comes down to Lamar Jackson's legs. They really need to start using him as a rusher more because all of these deep passes are going incomplete and he's turning the ball over more. So I think what they should be doing, and we kind of saw some coach speak, is let Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins just start to run all over the place and then mix in Marquis Brown, mix in Mark Andrews. But I think that every single time they're throwing it to one of the secondary receivers or giving the ball to one of the secondary running backs, not J.K. Dobbins, they're giving up points. So I hope and I think that J.K. Dobbins is going to start getting more and more work. This is a player that's leading the league in yards after contact, leading the league in broken tackles per carry, leading the league in yards per carry. So I think that J.K. Dobbins deserves more work. His snaps were up a little bit last week just because Mark Ingram was out. But I think you're going to start seeing J.K. Dobbins emerge more and more. I think that he's maybe like RB 22, 24 this week, somewhere around there. But I hope that we can start playing him as like a low-end RB2 moving forward. We'll have to see after this week.
And not just J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards as well. This tandem is so impactful when Mark Ingram is not on the field, and they can both get there together. Even last week, Edwards left the game for a little bit because he tweaked his knee, but he still got 16 carries on 26 snaps, had the only running back carry inside the 10-yard line, and averaged over 5 yards per carry as he's done his whole career against the Steelers front seven, whereas J.K. Dobbins also averaged 7.5 yards per touch. So together, they are arguably one of the league's best running back duos. It's just a matter of what the team does when Mark Ingram comes back. I don't think he plays this week. And OC Greg Roman also came out and said this has been the plan for Dobbins all along, is to have his role progress as the season moves on. So if we get even a slight bump right now after the 54 snaps he played, like, man, J.K. Dobbins could be a league winner down the stretch here.
I mean, that's just some major coach speak. It's like,
I know.
Oh yeah. We wanted to be actively worse. And so now this is exactly like, if you rip away just all the positivity, it's the idea, it's the concept of we want to be worse now. So then J.K. Dobbins can just, be better towards the end of the year. I mean, I don't believe that, but I do agree that if they believe more J.K. Dobbins is a good thing, then it's absolutely a good thing. Pat, I mean, it's funny that we're talking about Lamar the rusher, because it's true. Like, there's been so much focus on Lamar the passer regressing. I mean, somehow his connection with Marquis Brown has turned into Kyle Allen to Curtis Samuel this season. And then we haven't seen, a real Mark Andrews game outside of one contest since week 1, but actually his rushing performance has really dropped off this year. I mean, he's rushing for 22 fewer yards. He might have half the rushing touchdowns he did last year. He's fumbling the football. He's turning over the football double the rate than he was last year. Do you think that this is fixable? Because I know I keep saying it, but this is about the time, maybe we're a week or two late compared to last year, when in 2019, this team really started to hit its stride. But I think without Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, that's just going to be so much more difficult to do in 2020.
It will be difficult, but I mean, I think it's still fixable because it's not like the offense is like fundamentally broken. Like Mark Andrews and Marquis Brown, they're still getting open, for what were these wide open completions last year. Lamar is just not hitting them. And I mean, yeah, this is no longer a drill with Lamar Jackson. We're in week 9 and he's only the QB 11 by average points. And like the main part of that is his passing. Like you said, the rushing has fallen off too, but he's kind of so there were kind of rumors of like, I think he was on the injury report a few weeks ago that maybe he was playing at less than 100%. He's kind of reestablished his rushing floor over his past 2 games. He's hit 65 yards rushing in each of his past 2 games, had a big rushing play also called back in one of those games. So maybe we're getting that back, and he can start terrifying defenses with his legs again, opening things up for his arm. But yeah, this is half the season in the books, and we're not getting anywhere close to Lamar Jackson we expected. And like Josh Allen, he is really, really on the spot this week.
Good news is they're on turf, as Sharp Football's Rich Rebar pointed out, only for the second time in Lamar Jackson's whole career. And then also everyone's asking about, Mark Andrews, Marquis Brown. Like at least there's a little bit of a squeaky wheel narrative for Marquis Brown after the team forced him to delete his tweet. And then Mark Andrews, you can't turn anywhere anyways. Like Mark Andrews, I understand, is averaging the 7th most fantasy points per game among tight ends. But where else are you going to go? Because you're not going to bench him and you're not going to find a better streamer over him. So you just play them all and you hope this week.
Hey, and let's talk about this Colts offense, because it's just not the one that we expected. I mean, no explosive plays this season from T.Y. Hilton, who left very early on last week with a groin injury. He kind of seems on track to play, which is so weird when someone leaves a game so quickly. Obviously, Paris Campbell was creating explosive plays earlier in the year, but he is out. He's been on injured reserve. You have Marcus Johnson, you have Zach Pascal, you have Michael Pittman back. But whereas, Phillip Rivers was just supposed to be this guy who made some plays in crucial moments behind a great offensive line and hand the ball off to Jonathan Taylor, now he's like being asked to carry games in situations. And that's difficult to do with a 47-year-old Phillip Rivers.
Certainly, and the play volume is something that you have to watch. They're 24th in pass attempts, they're 9th in rush attempts, and like I said earlier, this is a team where there's no definitive starting player at any of these positions. Zach Pascal, possibly. Michael Pittman, possibly, if T.Y. Hilton's back. T.Y. Hilton is out. Trey Burton, possibly, but he's only running 15 out of 37 routes last week. And then we know the situation with the running backs is Jordan Wilkins going to be the starter over Jonathan Taylor, because he is way better than Jonathan Taylor is right now by any metric, by the eye test, however you want to dice it up. And even then, those guys are splitting snaps with Nyheim Hines, who is scoring some touchdowns, but is still not seeing that much usage outside of that. So this is one of the teams where I'm not sure if I'm going to rank any of these guys as like 12-team fantasy starters, just because we don't know where the ball is going to go. And they're projected for the 19th most points on the week against another ball control team. So you have 2 ball control teams. I don't know if there's going to be enough play volume for any of these guys.
And Jordan Wilkins isn't running routes. That's Nyheim Hines' role, of course. So you're basically playing poor man's Derrick Henry, who's splitting the touches with 2 other backs every single week. That's kind of what Jonathan Taylor has become as well. Pat, how did you even, where do you have these 3 guys ranked?
Well, I was going to ask you guys what your opinion of this was, because it was different. I went aggressive with Jordan Wilkins this week, and I have him as like a low-end RB2. But then, of course, he popped up on the injury report yesterday. It doesn't appear to be anything serious, but with Jonathan Taylor already running poorly before last week, then, them admitting after the game was at least partly due to an ankle injury. I feel like we just have to give Jonathan Taylor like a probation week at this point. I don't really see how I could rank Jonathan Taylor ahead of Jordan Wilkins this week, even if it was a mirage. But 20 carries, it was an in-game hostile takeover of the backfield. This was a close competitive game, and Jordan Wilkins took control of the backfield. Like you can't ignore that, especially when you have the injury alibi for Jonathan Taylor. That gives the Colts cover, to maybe see how this goes this week with Jordan Wilkins. And I don't feel great about, so it's 3 backs getting touches against an elite defense. So it's not like I feel great about it, but running back, is not great right now. I got Jordan Wilkins in there as a low-end RB2.
Well, it may not even be an elite defense, because they may have to call up their practice squad linebackers. They don't have any healthy linebackers right now due to the COVID list.
And cornerbacks. Marlon Humphrey will not be playing this weekend, and he's, one of the better young corners in the NFL. 7 close contacts with him, could not practice this week?
Yeah, they will probably be cleared, but you would prefer if they could practice. You prefer if like the heart of your defense practiced at all.
Most frustrating is that it's important to take stabs at these guys as well, because these are the ones that will probably lead your team to the fantasy playoffs. Their next 6 games for the Colts, they get the Titans twice, the Packers, the Texans, and the Raiders. So you got to take a chance on one of them. I don't know if you not buy high, but buy low on Jonathan Taylor. Maybe you just spend up a lot on Jordan Wilkins and hope for the best, but you have to do something with your team about this backfield.
All right, we will move on to the 1-6 Houston Texans, who are 6.5-point favorites on the road against producer Steven's Jacksonville Jaguars, who are also 1-6, straight on the path to Trevor Lawrence. Like, it's weird. One of these teams wants to win and they just can't, and the other one is just actively trying to lose. But despite all that, we have a 50 total in this game. Hayden, I mean, DJ Chark has been one of the bigger disappointments in fantasy football all season long. No Gardner Minshew in this contest. Most likely, Jake Luton, one of the three.
One of them
is correct. They have been saying via reports that this means that they will throw deep more often. I kind of feel like that is all directed at their best wide receiver, who has, again, been a disappointment this season.
Wide receiver 19 in fantasy usage over the last 4 weeks. He's also 8th in air yards over that span. And I think that there is a little bit of a narrative. Gardner Minshew is not the guy that's going to be throwing deep. He just doesn't have that type of arm talent. And I think that the new guy out of Oregon State, when you watch him, he's the exact opposite of Gardner Minshew. He's not going to be running around. He's not going to be creating plays outside of the pocket, but he can sling the ball downfield. I mean, he was somewhat productive at Oregon State. I think this is probably going to be a disaster, but I think if you're looking for a narrative, I think that he's going to throw the ball deeper downfield than Gardner Minshew. And I think that DJ Chark deserves to be listed as a wide receiver 3 this week. He's definitely boom bust, but I'm going to be going back to DJ Chark, and I don't think that you can play any of the other receivers. I think that the narrative that I'm going with is they will be throwing the ball deeper downfield.
Yeah, it's like, I think the ADOT by like the letter of the law will come up, but you talk about coach speak. I'm just not sure if the number 189 overall pick of the draft, they're going to throw him into the fire. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to get the deep game really cooking this week, and this guy's NFL debut. I am very skeptical in that. And earlier, Josh, when you said our producer's Jacksonville Jaguars, I thought you were going to say our producer was Jake Luton. And we had lost.
It might have been. We wouldn't have known. Yeah, we wouldn't have known. It might have been at one point, Daigle.
We knew what to expect from Ben DiNucci. We know what to expect from Jake Luton. Come on, guys. We know what to expect. I think Laviska can hang around because he is the one with this short ADOT, since Luton was more of a check down artist, as I wrote in our draft day blurb. And Chris Sims was actually quite high on Luton, but it's because he just doesn't turn the ball over because he doesn't take chances at all. 7.6 yards per attempt at Oregon State. So with Laviska's average depth of target under 6 yards, I think he's the one with the high floor here. And then you're hoping something positive comes from DJ Chark's usage. Otherwise, you're looking at a wide receiver 3 from the rest of the season, just running empty routes downfield.
I gotta say, I agree with Hayden and DJ Chark. When in these times of like uncertainty, when you don't know, like an unknown quarterback, like kind of weird target distribution, in general, it's best to bet on the best player, and that is still unquestionably DJ Chark.
Yeah, it's just your willingness at this point to bet on uncertain players on bad teams, and that can make or break your fantasy weeks. Meanwhile, James Robinson is quietly a top 10 running back in fantasy points per game this season. Super impressive undrafted rookie season from him. On the Houston side of this, Hayden, I think you kind of start everyone. I mean, obviously you're starting Deshaun Watson. Will Fuller was involved in trade talks this week. Brandon Cooks has had his moments in recent weeks, it feels like, and then David Johnson as well. All aboard the Houston Texans Bill O'Brien list system here.
Yes, they use him play action more. Deshaun Watson looks more comfortable. That's shocking with Bill O'Brien outside of the picture. The Texans are projected for the 4th most points on the week, all the way up at 28.5. So I think Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, I think both certainly established as at least upside wide receiver 2 plays during the bye weeks. I mean, Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 9 in fantasy usage over the last 4 weeks. He has a slightly higher target share over Will Fuller as well. I will certainly still be ranking Will Fuller ahead of Brandon Cooks, but I think both of them are every week starters right now. And I think that even David Johnson, I was kind of surprised. Duke Johnson's been back, but David Johnson's workload is still really strong. I think that this is an awesome spot as 7-point favorites. I think that the Texans could even be projected for even more than that this week against the Jaguars.
This is not to start him. This is not a suggestion to start him. But I will say that Houston running back coach came out and said that their goal over the next 9 games is to feature Duke Johnson more on early downs to see what they have. Because David Johnson's contract, of course, the dead money drops from $12 million as Josh rolls his eyes to $2.1 million in the offseason, making him expendable, whereas Duke still has a year left on his deal. So I'm just saying, if you want a stash for the late run here, he's not a bad stash.
All right, let's move on. The Carolina Panthers, who are 3-5 against the Kansas City Chiefs, who again are 7-1 and 10.5-point favorites at home with a big total of 52.5. Pat, I feel like this game is going to show that there are levels to the NFL, right? Like the Panthers have been a nice story. They have overperformed in terms of coaching, way above what their talent offers. Not to say that their, passing offense can't be productive week in and week out, but in order to beat the Chiefs, you have to force Kansas City into mistakes, turnovers, sacks that stall drives. And again, this defense has, been a nice story under Phil Snow and a whole bunch of rookies, the youngest team in the NFL, but they absolutely don't even have enough to, I think it's going to be very much like a Chiefs versus Jets performance like last week.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing with the Panthers is like the limits of like how far good coaching alone can take you. Not that there's no talent on this team, but Teddy Bridgewater has really hit a wall. Had multiple good matchups where he can't get the 3 touchdowns. Last week, it just was not good. I mean, part of this is he got banged up, took a ferocious hit during the game, but Teddy's hit a wall. Mike Davis had really hit a wall in place of Christian McCaffrey, which that was a great fantasy story. And he still remained fantasy relevant right to the very end. But we were seeing the huge, both a per rush and per catch basis efficiency gap between Christian McCaffrey and Mike Davis. And yeah, I mean, even too, like Robbie Anderson, one of the surprises of the season, he's been averaging quote unquote only 70 yards over the past 3 games. And the defense is springing more and more leaks. And they're still doing their best to limit big plays. But I mean, Julio Jones was really ripping seams in that defense last week. And it feels like maybe the Chiefs could finally take the lid all the way off of this overachieving defense. And the Panthers offense, it's just hard to know. They're getting even more conservative, lately, really involving Curtis Samuel more. Curtis Samuel getting the rushes. So, yeah, I just think we're going to see. We've seen the Panthers' best football already this season.
Just quick point, Dave, before you hop in. The point on Curtis Samuel, because for everyone out there who even has him rostered, he's been putting up points on your bench, right? And last week he scored 2 touchdowns. A major part of that, like you mentioned, was the rushing touchdown on 23 yards. And there's no way he's going to get that rushing work with Christian McCaffrey back. So some of his opportunities are just going to be slashed with CMC back in the fold.
Yeah, he was a good 1-game DFS option because the team cut Seth Roberts, their primary slot receiver, midweek. And then I believe they also sent Keith Kirkwood to the practice squad. So that's why Curtis Samuel played a season high in snaps and saw a season high in targets. But it's not production you really want to chase. Maybe just stash him. But for the Panthers offense, I don't know if I believe in it, but I will say the Chiefs at least have not been tested since they last played the Raiders and gave up 40 points in a loss. Because their last 3 games, it was Josh Allen in that short week we talked about, Drew Lock, and then the Jets this past week. Whereas the Panthers are still averaging the 5th most yards per drive, and Robbie Anderson just hadn't scored since week 1. The usage really hasn't changed for him. He just cannot find the end zone anymore. So that is my concern here. I like the over anyhow, and Bridgewater's not being able to score 3 touchdowns certainly is an oddity, but still, I think he's a fine streaming option.
Hayden, you know what I'm going to ask you? Going back to that Chiefs backfield, we've had this discussion for 3 straight weeks now. It's a conversation that has not been concrete at all because of the matchups. Again, as 10.5-point home favorites with a total of 52.5, I think you can make an argument to start both, even if both haven't really hit in the last few weeks.
I will not be starting Le'Veon Bell. He only played 17 snaps last week. He's not getting any of the high value touches that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still getting over Le'Veon Bell. We're seeing Clyde Edwards-Helaire start the game, start the second half, and they're kind of rotating snaps or rotating drives a little bit. So I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is certainly more of an RB2, certainly. And he had his worst expected fantasy points game of the year last week. But I don't think there's enough for Le'Veon Bell to warrant top 24, top 25 play. Even if we do project him to his snap counts to increase, I don't see the path for it this week at least, especially because I'm projecting Patrick Mahomes, like you said, Josh, to just light the Panthers secondary up. And I think that Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, And then we'll see if we get Sammy Watkins back. And if Sammy Watkins is out, then I think either one of Demarcus Robinson or McCole Hardman is going to pop. And I think that Patrick Mahomes is going to really start lighting all these defenses up in the second half of the season.
I mean, it's funny because Cole Hardman was actually finally used over Demarcus Robinson this past week, got 7 of his 9 targets from Patrick Mahomes. But even then, because we know what any wide receiver can do with Mahomes, Demarcus Robinson still backdoor his production for over 60 yards and a touchdown. But if Sammy Watkins comes back, of course, that ruins McCole Hardman's and Robinson's floors in this game. So it's just something you have to monitor.
So it was a huge restraint from Hayden not to get in the Sammy Watkins mention. All I'll say too is the Panthers are worse on the ground than the Jets are. If you can, there are teams that actually are worse in some phases of the game than the Jets, even though it is difficult to believe.
And one final point, talking about the worst, Panthers left guard, I think his last name is Snee. He's number 64. This is just from the Game Pass lab. Might be the worst left guard in football. I mean, he absolutely lost them that game last weekend. It was atrocious against Grady Jarrett on like conversions that they needed in short yard situations, giving up sacks and pressures and crucial timing. I think Chris Jones is actually just going to completely run him over. And I mean, the 10.5 points, it's a lot, but I could easily see the Chiefs covering that, definitely.
Josh, I write my top 5 best bets of the week in my blueprint column, and the Chiefs, I've already written them down as my number 1, 10.5.
There we go. Moving on to the 3-4 Detroit Lions, going to the Minnesota Vikings, who are 2-5, but are 4-point favorites here, a total of 52. Pat, at points this year, we've seen bad Matthew Stafford. We have seen and wanted, 2019 Matthew Stafford pre-second back injury. Last week, I would say there were moments where bad Matthew Stafford came back and it cost them the game, but then you go and look at the box score and it's exactly what we wanted. And now he goes against a Minnesota Vikings defense. When I wrote up their injury report, like 3 or 4 of their corners are all on it and 3 didn't participate on Wednesday. But no Kenny Golladay in a spot that could have been great for him because of a hip injury. Most likely he didn't practice on Wednesday. So what's your view of Matthew Stafford in this Lions offense, Pat?
It's weird because you talk about good Matthew Stafford and bad Matthew Stafford. This week we'll be getting no practice Matthew Stafford because he is on the reserve COVID-19 list after a high-risk contact. He will supposedly get cleared on Saturday. Like you said, last week he finally had the 2019 box score production, and it was a game where Kenny Golladay didn't get to do much. Matthew Stafford sprung Marvin Hall for a 100-yard game. We've had some rumblings finally from Marvin Jones the past few weeks. TJ Hawkinson is really, TJ Hawkinson looks like a top 5 tight end this week. So even without Kenny Golladay, against this Vikings defense, it's looking like a pretty appetizing setup on paper. But yeah, there's a quarterback who's not practicing. Matt Patricia, fundamentalist coach that he is, could be like, oh, the quarterback didn't practice this week. We're going to have to lean on the ground game. But Matthew Stafford could be like a really like a DFS wild card this week because it is a great matchup. But it's the Lions' game plan is uncertain, and it's just uncertain what to expect from a quarterback who doesn't practice.
My only worry is that this team does what it did the first 2 games, and Stafford averages 7.2 yards per attempt when he didn't have Golladay. Like Matt Patricia, this is an annual thing now. Matt Patricia builds a 22-man unit. He doesn't care about a 53-man organization. They lose a couple important starters like Kenny Golladay and Trey Flowers, 2 guys they literally could not afford to lose, and then they just crumble over the second half of the season. And I think that's what we see here, which is also bad news for Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen, because we know what Mike Zimmer wants to do. 14 pass attempts against the Packers, and that was a competitive game. Imagine if they get out to a lead and the Lions just crumble here. So I like the Vikings big. I'm concerned about the Lions moving forward overall.
I'm concerned about the pace. We're talking about the 17th pace with the Lions and the 29th pace with the Vikings. So I think play volume is going to be a concern. The other thing to watch, Taylor Decker, the left tackle, and then right tackle Vaitai, both didn't practice yesterday. If both of them are out and Kenny Golladay is out, we're looking at a very serious problem. So keep an eye on the injury report as well.
I would only add that the Vikings, trade away Yannick Ngakoue, don't have Donnell Hunter, so they can't rush the passer either. I mean, we need to mention it at least. We're coming off a just ludicrous game from Dalvin Cook of 226 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was really the star of our All-Stars podcast with Pat and Denny. I mean, the running back 1 in fantasy points per game this season. And Pat, you mentioned TJ Hawkinson, quietly a top 5 tight end in fantasy points per game this year. He was kind of the star, the shining light from that second tier of tight ends that we spent all summer talking about, and it's really been under the radar.
Yeah, it hasn't even been on that many targets either. So hopefully that finally grows with Kenny Golladay out. And if Dalvin Cook, the past 3 games that he's played from start to finish, has reached 130 yards rushing. So this could be another eruption spot for Dalvin Cook.
We say running backs don't matter, and then you see Dalvin Cook play over Alexander Madison. You're like, oh, maybe some running backs matter.
I made the exact same point on Wednesday's podcast. So occasionally a running back does matter, folks.
Let's move on to the 5-3 Chicago Bears. I don't think David Montgomery matters. They are 6-point road dogs against the Tennessee Titans, who are 6-point favorites, and 5-2. I think the Bears are on a 2-game losing streak. The Titans, or 3-game losing streak. I think the Titans have lost 2 in a row, including last week the Cincinnati Bengals. Total lack of pass rush, as we keep talking about, and that was very apparent against Joe Burrow. They were able to get him in the grasp a few times, but because of his athleticism, he was able to get out of it. But I do think at the end of the day, that pass rush could be the reason why a total lack of one is why they're not a real contender this season, despite the strengths. But let's talk about those strengths, Daigle. Do we see a bounce back spot from Ryan Tannehill, from A.J. Brown this week against the strength of the Bears, which is their defense?
I have said the past 2 weeks that the Titans offense is matchup proof, and I still believe that because what they're doing, several pieces are still sprinkling in and hitting every single week. Last week's performance against the Bengals was a lifeless one, honestly, but Corey Davis now still 10 targets, and he has 10 targets in back-to-back games, whereas Jonnu Smith is fresh off a season high in routes run, but he seems to be the player that is losing between Davis, Jonnu, and A.J. Brown because only 2 can get there every week. And even in a matchup that their offense failed, right? Their team total was 29. They came 2 scores away from even reaching it, but Derrick Henry still eclipsed 100 yards and a touchdown. So I do think that honestly that this total is too low because on the other side of the ball as well, the Titans don't offer a defensive presence against the Bears. Remember, we talked about the Bengals offensive line being a disaster, basically being short 2 starters, missing a 3rd one on Sunday morning. And yet the Titans not only didn't pressure Joe Burrow, they didn't sack him a single time. So for people who continue wanting to play Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, despite the poor performance under center, I think this is a game that everyone gets there.
Yeah, but the Titans defense, John, you said against the defense.
I took it all. I'm sorry.
An offensive line that was missing 4 starters and all 5 week 1 starters to get 0 sacks. And then at the back end of the defense, Jonathan Joseph, Joe Burrow targeted essentially every pass. And
Joe Burrow got cut.
He got cut this week.
Yep.
So they don't really exist, but this is a good matchup for Nicholas Foles.
Yeah, with the Titans, we have to keep an eye on Corey Davis and what that means for A.J. Brown because the last 2 weeks he's had way more fantasy usage than A.J. Brown. Of course, we all believe in A.J. Brown as the better player overall, but A.J. Brown's been living as like a borderline wide receiver 1-2 on like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 usage for the last 2 seasons. If Corey Davis all of a sudden becomes somebody that sees 7 targets per week, that's going to really put a lot of pressure for A.J. Brown to basically lead the league in efficiency if he wants to keep his like top 15 status. That's something to watch.
Daigle, I love the mono. Go ahead.
I was saying, I want to piggyback. A.J. Brown has cleared 75 yards only twice all season. Really a lot of low yardage totals. And Ryan Tannehill now has completed fewer than 20 passes in back-to-back losses. So I don't know if we're seeing the Titans pass defense enter like a famine phase, but it is something to monitor.
Daigle, I love the monologue that you went on about the Titans getting home in a lot of situations offensively, but I wonder and worry based on how they play that possibly being out their top 2 offensive tackles, if that's not just a complete massive issue, because we know that Taylor Lewan is on injury reserve and out for the season, but Dennis Kelly wasn't practicing earlier this week either. And Isaiah Wilson, who didn't practice this entire offseason for multiple reasons, now seems like he has to pick up the pieces at right tackle, and then you have journeyman left tackle and Tyson Breo. And I think quietly, you remember like the season when Khalil Mack was traded from the Raiders to the Bears, every single game that you watched of the Bears, because he was having a fantastic year, was just about that trade. I think he's quietly like shifted into the shadows a little bit, but this year he's performing like the best edge rusher in the NFL. He's been incredible. And so while the Titans can't rush anyone, they cut Vic Beasley, who they paid $9 million to. Jadeveon Clowney, as you know, this 1-year hitman is not hitting anyone. I think you look on the other end, and Khalil Mack could be that one player if it's possible to blow up this game completely.
And I will say Anthony Miller, slight usage change, ran a season high in drop routes per Nick Foles' dropbacks this past week with a season high 11 targets. The only issue for this game is that the Titans also acquired Desmond King, the league's best slot receiver per Pro Football Focus, and he would clearly be matched up with Miller in the slot.
Can he play this year? I mean, this week?
Desmond King?
Yeah.
I thought he could. Maybe he's not. Did I get that wrong?
No, I just didn't know if you have to like pass a certain amount of protocols or anything like that, but I think you can.
I think his was on the team, yes, because it was earlier.
Okay. Just making sure. I have questions that maybe people out there are asking too.
I mean, buddy,
I
still have all
sound
the
dumb,
questions.
so they don't have to, Daigle. All right. We move on to the 1-7 New York Giants against the 2-5 Washington football team.
Next.
Small total of 43 in this game, but Washington at home coming off a bye are 2.5-point favorites. And I want to reiterate that they're coming off a bye week. Unless we forget, Hayden Winks, that right beforehand, Antonio Gibson was heating up. I know the Giants are top 10 in rushing defense DVOA, but boy, I'm feeling Washington in this game, and I'm feeling Antonio Gibson.
Post-bye rookie bump narrative fully
Yes.
on tack for Antonio Gibson. The one missing ingredient, he has been soaking up all of the rushing work, including the goal line work, is can he get more involved as a pass catcher out of the backfield? And if you watched him on tape in college, that's what he was doing best. So I think that maybe you can get J.D. McKissic out of there and Antonio Gibson more into a bell cow role, and maybe not a full bell cow role, because I'm sure they still have concerns if can he pass protect, and that's what J.D. McKissic, of course, likes to do. But I think that you should see Antonio Gibson playing more passing downs than he has all season. I think that he's somebody that I'll be having inside my top 24. Even though the Giants played pretty well in the trenches on defense, I still think that there's a reason to believe the Washington football team should probably score a little more points than they have for most of the season this week.
We thought Gibson would have a high floor because of his league-proven receiving chops, but it's actually the complete opposite. He's surviving off the team's carries inside the 10-yard line over J.D. McKissic. Clearly, Peyton Barber's 33% snap rate before the bye was an anomaly because they had just destroyed the Cowboys' offense in the first half, just outplayed Dallas altogether. So, yes, I am looking for a bump here for Gibson as well, and I love him as a strong RB2 this week.
Love it. I'm feeling Washington in general. I mean, they have, according to DVOA, Pat, the number 2 total defense. And that pass rush going against this questionable Giants offensive line when Daniel Jones is behind them. I mean, at one point, I understand we're coming off a somewhat positive performance from the Giants against the Bucks, correct? Where it was like, oh, there were moments here, but then Daniel Jones entered the ball game and handed it over with his patented mental mistakes. And when you're pressured with, Chase Young and Montez Sweat and Daron Payne and Ryan Kerrigan and so on and so forth, Pat, I would be very, very nervous if I'm considering starting anyone on this Giants offense in my fantasy lineup.
You mean Daniel Jones, not being hyperbolic, I think he might have left the most yards on the field last Monday night that I have ever seen from a quarterback. Because going up against a really good defense, I mean, they were Giants open for big plays routinely, and he just didn't either see them or he didn't hit them. And it was a truly, truly awful performance. So, yeah, this is Daniel Jones is already bottom 3 or 4 every week in the ranks, but like you said, the Washington defense really, I don't know if it's people aren't saying they're a bad defense, but quietly, they're not getting enough credit for how good the defense has been. And yeah, you can't try. Too, you get more running back uncertainty because Devontae Freeman might be coming back this week. And yeah, it's a stay away spot for the Giants offense. And, for Washington's offense, it is weird to just everyone take it for granted that Kyle Allen is a quarterback, as an upgrade at quarterback, but he is, and he's doing what we expected. It took a few games longer than expected after the weird Alex Smith interlude, but based on what he did last year with the Panthers, we knew he could stabilize Antonio Gibson. We knew he could get Terry McLaurin's floor back up to where he needed to be and provide some ceiling. And we knew that he could maybe even do it with Logan Thomas, and he did that before Washington's bye. So as strange as it is, Washington's offense is kind of on the rise, at least for fantasy. And yeah, the Giants just keeps going in the wrong direction.
Logan Thomas back in play in our lives as a weekly tight end 1-2. Through the first month with Dwayne Haskins, 16 of his 24 targets were deemed catchable by Pro Football Focus, whereas the last 2 games with Kyle Allen, it has been 7 of 8. So you can feel confident streaming him, especially in the spot. Also, quickly, we thought Wayne Gallman was going to be the winner as a usage-based high floor option, but the team, of course, because of the Giants, 32 snaps to Wayne Gallman, 21 to Dion Lewis, and 21 to Alfred Morris. So just get away as quickly as you can.
Thank you for filling there a little bit, John Daigle. It's like a major episode for planes, trains, and automobiles over here this time, and I have no idea what's going on outside my window right now. All right, let's move on to the Las Vegas Raiders, who are facing the Los Angeles Chargers. 52 total in this one. Chargers actually 1-point favorites at home. Daigle, this is a fascinating line to me. The loss to Denver last week for the Chargers was the 4th this season in which the Chargers blew a double-digit lead, following 11 points to the Kansas City Chiefs in week 2, 17 to the Bucs and Saints in weeks 4 and week 5. Again, just 1-point favorites, and I'm guessing that's the home field advantage bump here, but against a Raiders team that has beaten the Saints this year, has beaten the Chiefs this year, just beat the Browns. I don't understand this. Explain it to me.
I know what you're trying to do, bait me into a bet, but I also like the Raiders to cover here
Dang it.
because we can throw the win game out the door. Don't worry about it whatsoever. Remember, prior to last week, Carr had still scored 19 fantasy points in 4 of his 5 games and then ran into that weather in Cleveland, which is just disastrous. But for the Raiders, the thing is, nothing has changed. Henry Ruggs is fresh off a season high and 90% of routes run on Derek Carr's dropbacks. So that's encouraging, even though they're still not using him properly. And honestly, he should have got his second foot down for a touchdown. That's on him.
He did. No, Daigle, he did get it in.
Of course,
it was stolen and ripped away because the football gods hate Hayden and I right now for some reason. It's that simple.
Whatever the case, Nelson Aguilar's usage also did not change. So these guys, I am still have 100% confidence in going back against the Chargers defense that, let's be honest, it's just not good, right? Like they just let Drew Lock have a day on them and come back and win the game. So I actually trust the Raiders offense in this spot.
I understand the line, even though it feels these are just 2 teams where the Raiders still, despite some impressive performances, I feel like you can never like truly know what to expect from either of these teams on a weekly basis. The Raiders defense is still bad. Justin Herbert is still playing super well. And I don't know who I would bet if I were a betting man, but I didn't find the line. I understood the line, the thought process of 2 wild card teams and the Chargers are at home.
I like the Chargers side here, and I'll tell you why. The last 2 weeks, the Chargers have been top 5 in neutral pass rate. I think that helps the offense because they're handing the ball off to these random running backs who just quite frankly aren't very good. And the Raiders are missing some guys. They have their injury report is something to watch on. Trent Brown, we don't know if he's going to play following his IV issue. And I think that the Chargers defense is getting a little healthier, and I think the pass rush could end up being a problem for Derek Carr if Trent Brown's out. So I like the Chargers here. And I will say, just buy all of the Chargers. Keenan Allen as a top 5 fantasy receiver. Yeah. I think Hunter Henry is going to end up paying off as a quality mid-range tight end 1. Mike Williams, I think, is probably the biggest beneficiary of this new look Chargers offense. Keep in mind, they were bottom 3 in neutral pass rate for like the first 7 weeks of the season, first 6 weeks of the season. If they're passing the ball downfield, which is what Herbert has been doing, Mike Williams could really start popping off. So I like him as a wide receiver 3 play. Justin Herbert as like a borderline top 5 play. And I think that this offense, they're projected for 26.5 points this week. I would love to take the over just on that total in general.
I know the better storyline is me versus Josh, but Hayden, my favorite taco spot, Oscar's Tacos, shout out, is in San Diego. So would you like to place a bet on an order? I'll take the Raiders cover. You take the 1.5 or whatever points bet.
1.
Has it now 1. Okay. So I'll have the Raiders -1, Hayden, virtual shake.
Yep, we got it. And a little tequila while we're there too.
They're not allowed to say that on the podcast, but yes.
Oh, you totally can. Next time we're going to show up with margaritas, all of us. Look, we've seen Justin Herbert play lights out against good defenses, right? I mean, Denver, mentioned them. We mentioned Kansas City. We've mentioned Tampa Bay. I mean, these are all tops in defenses. Even the Saints have started to turn around, and now he's in a complete smash spot against this Las Vegas Raiders team that talent-wise, play-wise, is one of the bottom 10 units in the league. So as long as Anthony Lynn, as Hayden has talked about in recent weeks, takes the training wheels off this offense and allows Justin Herbert to throw in neutral situations, then they can just simply outscore what the Raiders can possibly do. That's a possibility.
I've got one other thing. Of course, the Tyrod Taylor situation was the biggest Chargers medical weirdness of the year. They're also their right tackle, Brian Bulaga, their right guard, Trey Turner, haven't played since weeks 2 and 3. They never went on the injured reserve list. There's been no news. I think they're finally getting closer to playing, but they've been questionable and then ruled out the entire season. There's just been no news on that whatsoever. Those are their 2 best linemen if they are ever get healthy. So that's another reason to bet on them. Hopefully coming back, the Chargers medical staff just giving us no information on any of these guys. Tyrod Taylor hasn't played either.
It seems like total mismanagement, right? Like, unless they truly are day to day or week to week, we see the rest of the league putting these players in injury reserve for 3 weeks and bringing in another body. And the Chargers are like, nah, we're just going to have a shortened roster compared to everyone else in the league. Makes absolute no sense.
And then I will say my roommate was DMing Chargers beat writers like he's 14 all over again, trying to find out about Tremaine Pope's usage. And apparently it was just a hot hand situation. So Justin Jackson is still the one back you want among this backfield. Out-touched Pope 20-15, ran as many routes as Pope. Pope was used over Josh Kelly. The only concern about continuing to chase Justin Jackson is that he will lead in yardage, but they will still put Kelly inside the 10-yard line. So it's a wash, of course, but if you tell me to pick one, it's Jackson.
Yeah, believe I saw that Tremaine Pope did not practice on Wednesday with a concussion, so that's possible. If I remember going back and watching that game, Joshua Kelly made a mistake or didn't convert on like a 4th and short situation, and then Tremaine Pope immediately came in and started running well. So Kelly went on the bench, and then when Pope got the supposed concussion, that's when Kelly was reinserted. So I'm with you. As someone who thought Justin Kelly ran well earlier this season, Justin Jackson seems to be the lone player that you can count on each week in that backfield. All right. Dare I say that the 4-3 Miami Dolphins facing the 5-2 Arizona Cardinals, Patrick Daugherty, is the game of the weekend? It's a total of just 48.5, but boy, do I love this game with the Cardinals as 4.5-point favorites. Let's lead it off with the Cardinals offense, Pat. They're also coming off a bye. Chase Edmonds is going to get the start following the bye week, most likely. What is your expectations for this Cardinals offense that is going up against a top 3 defense? Yes, top 3 defense in the Miami Dolphins.
You mean the Dolphins defense had kind of been percolating before last week, but I mean, they're not flying under the radar anymore. Like, this is a genuinely really good defense, and this is going to be a problem. And the Cardinals offense, have never seemed like truly hit their stride. They came pretty close against the Seahawks. We can probably say they hit their stride against the Seahawks. And I think what we're all hoping is that Chase Edmonds having an every down role enhances that even further, because Kenyon Drake, even though the ankle injury is less serious than expected, is not going to play this week. Chase Edmonds is like top 6 or 7 in running back receptions. He has as many 20-plus yard runs as Kenyon Drake on 90 fewer carries. And Kenyon Drake had been playing a little better before the injury, but like a Cardinals offense that's kind of just been stop and start this season, stop and start. It seemed like they're about to hit their stride. Then they have like a bad quarter or a bad game. I really hope Chase Edmonds just increases the Cardinals' overall offensive outlook. But I mean, it's going to be a fascinating game. So you have DeAndre Hopkins going up against the secondary with some really good cornerbacks. The Dolphins kind of creating, if I'm not mistaken, like an insane amount of pressure, despite not really having like what you would think of as like a star-studded front 7 necessarily. So it is a very, very fascinating Cardinals team, thankfully coming off their bye. So they'll be well rested, had time to prepare. But fascinating game in the whatever Hayden, the 1:30 window this afternoon.
Exactly right. Brian Flores, I mean, the record's not going to show it, but he's one of the best coaches in the NFL, like already. This is the talent on this team is very mediocre at best, and they've just been playing way above expectations. Number 2 in passing EPA defense. They are 29th in rushing EPA defense. So I think that there's even more reasons to believe Chase Edmonds is like a borderline top 5 running back if Drake's ruled out. I think that he will get most of the touches. Maybe that you get Eno Benjamin to like supplant him like as like an early random downs. But I think that Chase Edmonds, it's liftoff time for him right now.
We've never done this before, so why not double dip? Why not go against 2 of the 3 on the show? And Josh, I will take the Dolphins to cover although it is also the upset of the week. I just have questions still about the Cardinals because their wins have come against a banged-up 49ers team in week 1, Washington, the Jets, Andy Dalton's Cowboys, and then they actually didn't have a single snap with a lead against the Seahawks and yet still won that game. So I will take the Dolphins, whose defense is getting healthy. I don't think they're as good as what they showed against Jared Goff, but I think they're good enough to perhaps win this game and cover.
This might surprise you, Daigle, but we're on the same side on this one.
You just talked. Oh, very good. Okay.
Nope, we're on the same side of this one. And how could I go against Brian Flores right now, who was so disrespectful to Jared Goff last week? I mean, and when they went empty, he just put his 5 defensive backs against the 5 pass catchers out there, just overloaded the box and just swamped Jared Goff. And it's like the guy never played in the NFL before. He was throwing these hot reads and hot routes to the sideline with this noodle arm that should have been multiple pick sixes out there. Now, Jared Goff and Kyler Murray are totally different animals, not just from a talent perspective, but also from how they play the game. And in fact, we've seen Kyler Murray in a lot of these situations when he is one-on-one with a free rusher, be able to create something. But Daigle, we've also seen Kyler Murray at times, especially this season, look flustered. Like when something's not there, he spins around the pocket, looks a little bit confused, and then takes sacks himself. What Brian Flores, to reiterate the points you guys have already made, has done in a year is incredible. I mean, this team, I believe, was number 32 last year in pass D DVOA, and now they are a top 3 unit. And it's been on the heels of a healthy Xavier Howard, paying Byron Jones, drafting Noah I, and being able to manufacture a pass rush against cast-offs like Shaq Lawson and Emmanuel Ogba. What we talk about with offensive coordinators around the league, play callers around the league, like Kyle Shanahan, even Sean McVay on that side of the ball, Brian Flores right now is doing to the defensive side of the ball. And while this is an offensive-based league, and it's why we watch these games, I'm watching each and every Miami Dolphins game right now to see what Brian Flores is doing defensively, and I never say that.
I'm watching to make sure Tua still keeps these guys relevant because one test doesn't mean anything. It goes against Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Of course, it was tough, but at least there's reason to now hope for more with Mike Gesicki's usage, who's already leading the league at his position in snap rate from the slot. But Isaiah Ford's getting traded to the Patriots quietly leaves behind a team high 22 slot routes per game. And so I would assume that goes to Gesicki being hopefully a high floor option as the season progresses here.
Quietly, we do need to talk about Christian Kirk really quickly because
and
I
Dolphins
believe,
backfield as well.
Yeah, because Christian Kirk has 11 combined targets and 7 catches, but 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games in that same span of time. I just talked about, this Dolphins pass rush, this Dolphins secondary. I absolutely still think that Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins is going to work because that is bulletproof in these situations. But despite Christian Kirk most likely, again, putting up big weeks on your bench, I don't think this is the type of game to put him in. So
I will say that with Kenyon Drake most likely out, I do wonder if the Cardinals are going to kind of flip their neutral pass rates and pass the ball even more because they don't have that traditional runner. And that would probably elevate somebody like Christian Kirk, just because I would guess that this would be a game to get Kyler Murray his pass attempts up again, just because they're not going to be doing these 1st and 10 runs like we were seeing earlier in the season.
Pat, go ahead.
I was going to say, before the bye, they also started playing more 4 wide receiver sets, which is why Andy Isabella's slot rate had increased a lot the last 2 games.
Pat, how are you handling this Miami backfield situation? Because Myles Gaskin had been getting like quote unquote feature back work. Now, we had hoped that Matt Breida was going to take a hold of this backfield. He's been on the injury report, not practicing all week long. Fantasy Twitter's darling and Patrick Laird is somehow back in our lives. So is no one's fantasy darling and Jordan Howard. What's the outlook here for the rankings, Pat?
I will say real quick about the Dolphins. It was back in week 2, but they played a quarterback somewhat similar to Kyler Murray. It's kind of apples and oranges, but Josh Allen went nuclear against the Dolphins in week 2. So it's not like this is like they're like become a total stay away unit. They've totally destroyed quarterbacks that have to be managed and manipulated by their coaches and the 49ers and the Rams. But we're not like treating them as like a stay away spot yet for people like Kyler Murray. And the Dolphins backfield, it's going to be just a 3-man mess. It's really a situation. People don't have the luxury to just totally ignore and avoid situations. But if you have close situations, close decisions, like lean away from the Dolphins backfield because still, John, what do you think the over-under for Jordan Howard carries is? I mean, 9.5. Like,
Too many.
He's not going to get to like 20 carries. Patrick Laird, what is he going to be? 5 catches for 26 yards. And I believe, was the number 3 running back they say might be involved? Salvin Ahmed, I believe.
Yeah, because DeAndre Washington can't be activated for this game. He was traded too late.
So yeah, fantasy, a lot of people are desperate situations. I have Jordan Howard ranked, I believe, right in like the outer edge of like the top 40. So you can play him as like a desperation flex who will maybe cash in a goal line carry or two. But yeah, if you have like close decisions, I would decide against the Dolphins backfield.
All right, we move on to the 7-0 Pittsburgh Steelers going to Dallas, facing the Dallas Cowboys.
What a joke.
13.5 point spread in this one and a total of 41.5. I mean, good grief. Okay, I'm going to try to put, Hayden, this Dallas offensive game plan into perspective here, because obviously last week with Ben DiNucci, and that's the last time I get to say that this season, probably.
Hey, don't say that too soon, man. This is Cowboy. The way this Cowboy season's going.
Well, the reason I say that is because after one game, they're most likely switching over to Garrett Gilbert or Cooper Rush, who lost out to Ben DiNucci in the preseason. But Hayden, Kellen Moore shifted how he utilized his wide receivers in that game. I mean, you have to when your offensive line absolutely sucks and your quarterback absolutely sucks. So Michael Gallup's ADOT, who led the team in targets, I believe, dropped from 15.6 to 6.8 last week. CeeDee Lamb's dropped from 9.5 to 7.2. Amari Cooper's dropped from 8.7 to 8.2. So on some level, that gives us a little bit of hope that, hey, maybe they can force and manufacture some targets and some receptions for these guys. But you're also going now and facing a defense that has the best pass rushing unit in the NFL against maybe and most likely the worst offensive line in the NFL and good secondary players like Minkah Fitzpatrick as well.
The Cowboys are projected for fewer points this week than the Jets were against the Chiefs last week. They're projected for 14 points. Like, I don't know. I'll rank Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb still ahead of Michael Gallup, but I mean, are any of them in the top 25? Probably not. And Ezekiel Elliott, your expectations have to completely flip. His expected fantasy points in the first 6 weeks were up at 24. The last 2 weeks, he's averaging at 12 points. So, I mean, he's a low end RB2. I know Daigle's had some serious thoughts about Zeke Elliott on Twitter. I'll be ranking Amari Cooper. I think you still probably have to play him, maybe CeeDee Lamb. But, I mean, guys, 14 points.
It's either Cooper Rush or former AAF inaugural champion Garrett Gilbert under center who played for the Orlando Apollos. Either way, it's an absolute disaster. Zeke Elliott, the RB 18, 39, and 32 the past 3 games. This Cowboys offense in that span has averaged 7.3 points per game since they lost Dak Prescott. You're just trying to get away from everyone. CeeDee Lamb, a season low 44% snap rate this past game as well. Zeke Elliott limited in both practices on Wednesday and Thursday. I mean, I don't know what to tell you here. You can try and trade Amari Cooper for name's sake right now to get off of him, but man, even starting him over someone like Darnell Mooney, like what are we doing here? What are we doing?
So it's SMU legend Garrett Gilbert. I bet he'll get the start. Zeke Elliott, 75 yards one time since week 2. I will say, even in these truly desperate situations, it is rare that a team lets a player like Amari Cooper like fall all the way off the map. I think at some point, like a 4 or 5 catch floor will probably stabilize for Amari Cooper. And this is an offense too, again, with these quarterbacks, like these are not quarterbacks who can be ignoring the slot. I think at some point we're going to start getting some cheap conversions to CeeDee Lamb again, and I'm keeping Amari like Hayden said, kind of right in the top 25 periphery. I think I'm like wide receiver 26 or 27, and I basically have like CeeDee Lamb is like still like a high end wide receiver 4 in that 36 to 40 range, because you'd still rather bet on that talent. Like he's gonna get 5 targets more weeks than not, and if CeeDee Lamb is getting 5 targets, you can still get a nice useful day for your fantasy team.
And copying and pasting the conversation last week between the Chiefs against the Jets, I think if you do the same thing this week with the Steelers against this Cowboys defense, while the total is very small at 41.5, I believe their team total, Hayden, is right under 28 points. And so just think about 28 points in either game, and that means you're still playing Juju. That means you're still playing Chase Claypool. You're still playing James Conner. maybe thinking about Ben Roethlisberger.
Say Deontay,
as well.
please.
Yeah, we're just John and I are just sitting here waiting. Like, say the line, Josh.
Please say Deontay Johnson.
And Deontay Johnson's going to lead this team in wide receiver stats this week.
Thank you. That's all I ask.
I will say the Cowboys are bottom 4 in pass attempts allowed and number 1 in carries per allowed. So I will say James Conner, definitely the guy. I think that he deserves to be a top 8 fantasy running back, whether you like his explosiveness or not. When you're 14-point favorites, when you're projected for 28 points in a week, and the defense can't stop the run because Jalen Smith runs down the wrong gap every single time, I think that James Conner is going to go completely nuts again.
Agree.
New Orleans Saints, Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football. What a game this is. 5-2 Saints on the road against the Bucs, who are 6-2 and 4-point favorites, and arguably the best team in the NFL at this moment. 51.5 total at this
I'm
time.
going to interrupt you. Does the best team in the NFL almost lose to the New York Giants, though? I mean,
look, it's the NFL, Pat. There's a lot of parity. This isn't, Aston Villa against Liverpool when, the best team wins 7-2 in those matchups. All right. These two teams played in week 1. John Daigle, remember that? Tom Brady was not in sync with his wide receivers. Drew Brees, I think, only totaled about 160 or 180 passing yards, but got home with 2 red zone touchdowns. Well, ever since the Bucs, it kind of feels like, outside of another game against the Raiders, have only improved in those situations. What's your outlook for the Bucs wide receivers and offense in this game? Because we've seen some shaky usage in the backfield, and now we throw Antonio Brown and drop him into that wide receiver group in Tampa Bay.
Although I actually am very excited about this game, since this is 2 teams that will probably finish top 3 with the Seahawks and seeding in the NFC. I will speak politely about it because it's a company game, because I'm not ready to hear about how many times one takes the career touchdown passing record over the other every single time they throw a touchdown. Either way, though, I honestly think the Bucs have looked bad when they haven't had Chris Godwin, because the middle of the field hasn't been fluid. Yes, Mike Evans has now played nearly 60% of his snaps from the slot the past 2 games, which also allowed him to get away from James Bradbury against the Giants this past week. But you still need someone more in the flow from the slot, not like a big boundary receiver like Mike Evans. Also why Brady was frustrated on Monday night, because they had Jaden Mickens playing there a lot. And of course, Jaden Mickens doesn't know how to run routes for Tom Brady, of course. Whereas now you have Antonio Brown, who has a proven rapport, and they're 1 game together at least, from Brady. So I think we can expect amazing offense on both sides. I am curious personally, because I'm not all in on AB in his very first game. All in on picking him up, but not all in on starting him immediately. So I'm more curious where Pat has him ranked, because maybe I'm just behind the boat here, and he could be like a wide receiver 1 immediately.
No, I've got him right at the back end of wide receiver 4, like 48 to 50. Just a classic wait and see, right?
Okay.
Because Bruce Arians said he could play as few as 10 snaps. I mean, that's unlikely, but as a guy who barely played football in 2 years, Bruce Arians' outer range estimate was 35 snaps. I mean, this is Antonio Brown. He's a future Hall of Famer, at least based on his talent. He could blow by that in the first game, but it's going to be it's like all year, I feel like we can't get like what the true Bucs offense looks like. And it's just be another weird week where we don't really know where the targets are going, because Chris Godwin might be coming back. And then you're dropping in Antonio Brown. You've got Rob Gronkowski coming on more and more. And but yeah, Antonio Brown, this has to be a classic wait and see. And he is a wide receiver 4. Like if you're desperate, I mean, we know that he could have 2 touchdowns and like 4 targets. So you can get him in there in those kind of desperate situations. But I'm not forcing the issue with Antonio Brown this week.
I'm going to start him as like a wide receiver 2-3.
Okay.
Last time they played Tom Brady and Antonio Brown, he ran 17 routes. He saw 8 targets. Of course, there's more competition here, but even on a limited workload, Antonio Brown, I think, is going to get schemed open. I think that he's the type of player who, while we haven't seen him in a while, I'm betting that he's going to be in great shape, and he hasn't been hit that very much. And I think that Tom Brady was so desperate to get Antonio Brown back on the team for a reason. I think that Antonio Brown, I'm going to be ranking him first out of all 3 of these wide receivers immediately. I think that Tom Brady really wants to get Antonio Brown going, and the Bucs are all of a sudden top 5 in pass attempts. This should be a competitive game. It should be a high-scoring game. I want to be starting Antonio Brown if I have him.
I'm with Hayden. in this one. Look, and it adds up on the defensive side of the ball for the Saints right now. 79% of the touchdowns allowed by the Saints have come via the air, and opponents have converted 83% of their red zone opportunities for touchdowns against the New Orleans Saints. I know we know, Mike Evans is somehow scoring in every single red zone catch that he has, but just again, drop Antonio Brown into that situation. And even if you're going to put in the slot, they go like we're talking about without Chris Godwin, it's going to be, I think we've seen Bruce Arians, oversell situations where he shouldn't have oversold them. And maybe he's underselling this one in order for us to not have too high of expectations. And really, he's going to unleash Antonio Brown in this first game and in this first contest.
I'm still an undecided voter on AB personally. I'll decide Sunday, but I do come on this podcast and sell the Saints defense every single week. Sell them away, by the way, not sell for them. And against the Bears even last week, 38-yard run by David Montgomery of all players, 24-yard touchdown to Allen Robinson, who just dusted Marshawn Lattimore off the line, and a 50-yard play to Darnell Mooney. So they're still leaking big plays. So that does bode well for Antonio Brown.
This is, the narrative that gets repeated every single time Tom Brady plays a football game. So I have to do it. If they keep him clean, which the Bucs have been able to do with this great offensive line, then he just can dice up anyone at this point in his career still. But the Saints, while Daigle, I agree with you from a number standpoint, have been giving up a lot of yards and points and those types of things. We've seen Marcus Davenport come back and play really good football. Cameron Jordan is still there. Sheldon Rankins in the middle. I keep going down that list. It's going to be a difficult competition, right? The Bucs have just beaten up on some bad defensive lines, and this is not one of those. Pat, what's the situation with Michael Thomas? Feels like someone that pops up each week around this time where there's some optimism that he might play. And in his absence, Alvin Kamara has basically been a top 12 scoring wide receiver as well.
Well, yeah, Saints insider Denny Carter tells me that Michael Thomas might be ready for week 1, 2023 is what it's at. The Saints are one of the most opaque teams in the league with injury information, but it appears Michael Thomas is actually going to play this week. And I think despite Drew Brees having success with all sorts of anonymous receivers during Michael Thomas's absence, I immediately plugged Michael Thomas back in the top 10. I have him as the wide receiver 9. I think 8 to 10 targets is basically a given, even with Emanuel Sanders also coming back off the COVID-19 list. In the game that we expect to be high scoring, the Saints will force the issue with Michael Thomas. And the good news is, it's not good he's coming back from a hamstring, but teams have a really bad habit of rushing players back from high ankle sprains. And the hamstring at least prevented that from happening with Michael Thomas. And now his high ankle sprain is probably actually close to 100% health. So maybe it's irresponsible, but I'm jamming Michael Thomas into my top 10.
Daigle, do you have any hesitation? Because Michael Thomas did play in that week 1 game. He played 81% of the snaps, totaled 17 yards at the end of the day, I believe, on 5 targets. Is there any hesitation playing him coming off a multi-week injury considering that? Or is it a statement of you can't just keep a talent like Michael Thomas down in back-to-back games against the same team?
The latter point. I'm going right back to Michael Thomas. I will say, for as many injuries and struggles there are in fantasy football this year, the top and the highest point of the ladder for wide receivers is actually really strong. Like even Keenan Allen coming in and presenting himself as a top 5 option weekly. Having said that, we know Michael Thomas's ADOT is super safe. That's what they're going to do. They're going to play it safe underneath against the Bucs. And quietly, Drew Brees' performance outdoors, on the road, in Chicago, in cold weather, against the Bears defense, who hasn't allowed a QB1 performance all year, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns without any starting receivers is quietly one of the most impressive quarterback performance all year long if you just take away the box score. So I still do like this offense with Michael Thomas immediately.
I have Michael Thomas as a sell candidate the second that you can know he's going to be active. I have some concerns with the volume. I think that he's going to, at worst, be a wide receiver 2. But I don't see the total ceiling because last year, Alvin Kamara was not playing well. He was banged up. And that's why I think they were really feeding the ball to Michael Thomas. Now you have Emanuel Sanders, who was really coming on before his injury. We have 2 soft tissue or ligament issues with Michael Thomas, and they're 28th in neutral pace. I'm pretty concerned that Michael Thomas is not going to be the 9+ weekly targets player, and he's might become a wide receiver 2 on 7 to 8, maybe 9 targets per game. And I think if people are going to be treating him as every single week wide receiver 1, I would be selling that notion if you can in season long.
All right, this is
I would
already.
say, Mike, he played with a healthy Alvin Kamara for many years, 2 years, and like he's been a 150 target player when he's healthy the past. So I think the targets will be there for Michael. Maybe not quite last year's totally astronomical 185 target pace, but I think there will be enough looks there for Michael Thomas in the second half of the season.
All right, this is already our longest episode of the season.
And we said pre-show that we didn't have much to talk about. And yet here we are dissecting everything.
Well, Daigle, I mean, we certainly can't skip this Monday Night Football spectacular.
Are you sure?
The New England Patriots and the New York Jets. Patriots are 7-point favorites here with a total of 42.5. Daigle, I'll turn to you first. Do you put your fantasy week on the line, letting it ride on Cam Newton and Damien Harris against this lowly Jets defense?
Cam Newton still quietly finishes the QB 11 overall last week because his legs continue propelling him as a QB 1. So I will still go back to Cam Newton. The issue with Damien Harris, however, isn't his non-existent passing role, as he's now totaled 2 targets on just 14 routes through 4 games since being activated. It's that Sony Michel actually returned to practice on Thursday, and they activated his 21-day window. And we won't know, unfortunately, in what is Harris and the Patriots' best matchup to date, if Michel will be active until Monday, most likely. So I'm riding into the week still hoping to start Damien Harris in this smash spot since the Patriots are still favorites over a touchdown. But if Michel is activated, we know that's Harris's role. They are going to cannibalize one another. And so that's the concern, is taking it to the risk and like playing it down to the minute.
Yeah, I think he's like the most boom bust, like low end RB2. I don't want to get overly optimistic for the reason that Daigle just said, and because there's even in this matchup a pretty low floor. I mean, he could rush 16 times for 60 yards, doesn't find the end zone, and then you're looking at a really poor week. James White's still involved. Rex Burkhead's mixing in a little bit, not as much as he was earlier. We don't know what Sony Michel is, and we don't know what this Patriots offense looks like just in general. Of course, he can rush for 16 yards, 2 touchdowns, 100 yards in classic Patriots fashion. I think that he's just very boom bust the way he's being used. Can he get those goal line touches, and will they be going to Cam Newton or Damien Harris? That's what you have to kind of be debating on.
Pat, is Sam Darnold going to see ghosts in this game?
Yes. I mean, Sam Darnold's just kind of, it's just to the point where, I mean, back-to-back weeks, you know, we had like really great, like garbage time second half scripts, and still like this doesn't provide any production whatsoever. Even with this Patriots defense, you know, like being a shell of its former self, it's still been a bad matchup for like young or like struggling quarterbacks this season. And Sam Darnold, it's just, there's no light at the end of the tunnel here, really. I mean, Jamison Crowder, too, probably not playing. Denzel Mims, he found for 2 nice catches early in the game last week against the Chiefs, and then he targeted him 1 time in the final 50 minutes of the game. So there's just no positives to cling to right now with Sam Darnold.
And over the past 2 weeks, like even though Sam Darnold likes his slot receiver and Braxton Berrios has 18 targets for 64 yards the past 2 weeks. Like the targets do not matter. They are different whenever they are Jets receivers.
Look, I'm not saying it's his fault, and Hayden, maybe I can get your thoughts on this, but as of now, I think like any person advocating for the future of Sam Darnold should just shut up, because he's just not playing well. And I understand that the situation has been awful, but even there were points last year and points this year when everything goes well, he's still like a bottom 10, bottom 5 quarterback in the NFL. And again, I would say this situation, it's not his fault, but wasting airtime, wasting energy trying to defend this guy at this point when your future is obviously going to be somewhere else in you know, just a couple months. That's at least my view on this entire situation.
I don't think there's any ceiling with Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
There's nothing that he does that's explosive. He's not like a crazy athlete. He is still having some issues with the development and how he's seeing the field. So I think that the Jets with the first pick, they would be out of their mind to keep Sam Darnold. I think that they should trade him or just let him sit on the bench. I think that he kind of profiles as like a classic bridge quarterback for his career. He's super young, so there's still, maybe I'm wrong here because he's like still like, I mean, he's younger than me. That's crazy. And I just don't see that. I don't see that his ceiling is overly high where if you're a franchise to bring him in and be like completely sold. I think he deserves another chance, but maybe another chance like in a 1-year window. And I think that he might just end up being a classic, like quality bridge quarterback. And maybe he has like a Ryan Tannehill, like resurgence after he gets away from Adam Gase, but you just haven't seen enough with him on tape.
Yeah.
Really.
I would buy Sam Darnold stock for the future, not for this year, but when he gets away from Adam Gase, of course. Adam Gase has stunted his development. He had, I think it was 5 games his rookie year with over 8 yards per attempt. Then he gets under Adam Gase, and of course, we knew it was going to happen. But for the future, like we can say Josh Rosen's is cooked. We can say Dwayne Haskins is cooked. I'm still in on Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I think there's somewhere in between those guys. Like those guys were showing nothing. Sam Darnold's shown enough.
Exactly.
If you're trying to win a Super Bowl, if you're just trying to sign somebody, I mean, I just don't see him being like a playoff contender unless he's
development
like best talent.
Would be wise to make a low ball offer for him in the offseason and just see what he has.
Yeah, maybe like the Patriots like swoop in. I'm not sure if the Jets and the Patriots would agree to a trade or anything like that, but maybe you give him 1 year with a good coaching staff to see if anything blossoms. But just on tape, he just doesn't pass the like high ceiling eye test, in my opinion.
I'll say bridge quarterbacks, except for Ryan Fitzpatrick, aren't usually known for interceptions. So that could be bad for Sam Darnold. And we're 90 minutes into this podcast and no one has said a word about Hayden's mustache. And we need to acknowledge it. He's going for it. And anytime we need to acknowledge mustache game. I just wanted to say shout out to Hayden.
And just to bring this completely full circle, the one moment I realized how young Hayden was is when he had no clue what hanging chads were, Pat. Like he just did not know that moment in history when the three of us, I feel like I vividly remember coming home from school and it being on the television day in and day out for way too long. Anyways, that's a relevant topic right now. All right, we're going to get out of here on that note for John Daigle. Oh, before I get out of here, Rotoworld Live, served by Applebee's. That will be noon Eastern on Sunday. Join us 45 minutes leading up to kickoff. We will go through your start set questions, set perfect lineups against on YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, all those wonderful places.
You may be even able to join Josh's apartment live because there's so many trains going back and forth that you can find a trip easily.
Today has been just like a sound machine outside. Also, Hayden and Daigle have building blocks. Speaking of, another one's coming by right now on Friday afternoon. Daigle, who's the guest this week?
Someone I am a big personal fan of, Draft Sharks Jared Smola will be joining us Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern.
Josh, I need to shout out. I do a live chat on Fridays too at 1 p.m. Eastern. Or, no, 2 p.m. Eastern. Sorry, 2 p.m. Eastern.
And check out Pat's rankings as well. And we'll have a game-by-game recap show on Monday morning for all of you. All right. Thank you so much. For John Daigle, for Hayden Winks, for Patrick Daugherty, for the Trains Outside, I am Josh Norris. Up the Villa. Talk to y'all soon. See ya.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.